I remember after the meeting, I went back to my office. I was like, yeah, he was lying. Like, there's no way his story is real.
Check it out.
All right, Victor. When I met you, obviously it was probably your first month on political asylum here. I look behind you and I see the Ukrainian flag and the Russian flag. So you grew up in Russia, but you're also Ukrainian. It's an interesting dynamic. Tell the story of your life.
To go back in time a little bit, I've been always interested in writing things. And since I was 14 years old, I had my blogs on social media where I would publish mostly about international relations, politics, history. And by the time I turned 18, I had thousands and thousands of followers on social media. When I worked at the newspaper after Vladimir Putin was re-elected, we had a very major rallies all across the country. I went to the Pushkinskaya Square in the center of Moscow. You had everyone, very peaceful rally. You had students, mom and dads with their kids, children, students, everyone. Things were quite usual until the moment I felt some panic in the crowd. I've heard scream, and I went there. I went to see what is the reason of that group of people wearing camouflage. Some paramilitary group or something. They were holding whips, and then they were using that against the crowd, against those peaceful protesters. After that rally, we started identifying those individuals. We were able to gather a group of journalists and start looking into that, investigating that. We used facial recognition, we used open source intelligence, and quite successfully, we found most of those individuals that engaged in this street violence on that day. Most of them were veterans of paramilitary groups that Russia engaged in different conflicts in the region, which after that became my full-time job. We looked into police brutality, we looked into corruption and many other things that bothered Russian civil society. And I can say that it was the first time when Russian civil society in the modern times stood up for itself and tried to defend themselves. Through this project, we built up the volunteer network, but soon enough, it drew some negative attention from the authorities. One of the oligarchs that are close to Putin initiated an investigation into me, our project, and the entire team that worked on this. Our team made the decision to leave Russia temporarily. A lawyer of ours told that you guys, it's not going to be safe. You're going to face prosecution here. We realized we are not able to come back to Russia.
What you did back home was pretty bold. You took quite the risk, and I'm sure you knew it was a risk at the time. I guess my question for you is, why was it worth taking that risk?
I sincerely believe that courageous people build the future, and a risk is necessary if you have a plan that you pursue, right? I chose journalism. I had a responsibility of utilizing it in a way that will be the most fruitful, not just for myself, but in order to create a bigger, greater good for society. I think as immigrants, both of us, we share tremendous respect for this country, for this United States, and its history and its past.
I think it's interesting you bring that up. So I'm first generation son of immigrants. So my parents were born and raised in Lebanon, came here around the 70s during the Lebanese Civil War. Given what's going on in the world, I'd love to hear your thoughts on kind of bridging that gap. You clearly have a passion for improving Russia, and that's why you took the risk that you did.
Peoples of Ukraine and Russia have been historically very close. And being a Ukrainian that grew up in Russia, in Russian culture, went to the Russian school, I would go to Ukraine every summer, right? I would have Ukrainians in Kiev, and I would have friends in Moscow. And people would be very respectful to each other's cultures and backgrounds. And it was quite a nightmare to see how powerful propaganda is, that overnight, almost overnight, people turned backs on each other. But when I started noticing what the Russian government promotes, the kind of ideas that the president of the Russian Federation is powered with, I was terrified. And that was a moment when interest in hybrid warfare and disinformation woke up in me. Because those techniques, looking at the people that surround you, and next day, they drastically change their ideas based on the information that was fed to them is quite an experience, right? Without the critical thinking, it's very easy to buy into that narrative. Now we're at the point of history when there is a battle not between two ethnicities, not between two nations, but between ideas, between cultures. It's very apparent that our goals are the same. They are not that different from one another. At this point, it's very important for us to get together, and that's what I would also tell to these groups of people, to treat each other kindly. And people underestimate the power of kindness, right? Because with radicalization, that unfortunately takes place not just in that part of the world. You can quickly demonize the other side. It's the path of least resistance. Mark, my question to you is, what is fear? What does every fear come down to?
So for me in my life, I dealt with a lot of, when growing up, I think genetically just had a lot of anxiety. So I would get panic attacks, and they were all rooted in this fear of like not doing well enough or embarrassing myself in front of a group of people. And what I realized is I just was taking life too seriously. I was worrying too much about things that weren't important. And so to get over it, really, I just pursued everything that scared me, right? I get excited when I find things that make me anxious or scared.
You almost use it as a compass, right?
Exactly.
I really like the points that you've made there. What you want to do is to act, and this is what courage is in its definition, for me, is to act according to plan and be able to control your own actions despite the stress factor.
You were probably fearful when they started the investigation on you and your family. You knew that risk, you knew the fear they would cause. You were willing to overcome your fear because you were so passionate about what you were doing. So I think for people who want to overcome fear, I think first and foremost, find what you're passionate about. Because if you're pursuing your passion, the fear will dissipate.
How did you end up here at ASU?
So going into college, there was a lot of options available to me, but I only applied one place. Like, it was no doubt I was going to go to ASU. President Crow pulled me aside with my former boss, Ponch, who's now the director of the National Science Foundation. And they've had this long vision, developing a student-driven skunk works. And by that, I mean really assembling a great group of our students who are just motivated to change the world. I saw it as a great challenge. I was 24 years old. I had never been in a research lab, so I didn't know how they were formed or designed or structured. And it was good because it gave me a chance to design this lab that we now call Luminosity from the ground up, and what I thought that people my age, how they would form a lab that was innovative. And so I didn't think we were doing anything outside of the box. And years later, we've won a lot of national recognition for the work that we've done.
Absolutely, and no wonder that was the place that attracted me.
How has that enabled you? What kind of projects have you worked on? Can you give one example of using Luminosity as a mechanism to make a change?
I think one of the first projects that I started myself was in the field of disinformation and hybrid warfare. Being here in the US, I've observed the need for that as well. As someone who worked in a newsroom, I spotted the need for the solution that would help people that are faced with large volumes of information to make better decisions. Right? Because at the end of the day, we as society, as a global community, are faced with this idea that there is truth and there is fake information.
To have someone like you in the lab that has that global perspective, and we're lucky to have people from all over the world, but it was interesting. It was probably 2017, 18. When you came with that idea around disinformation, you knew that was a problem, and that was well before we were really paying attention to that, maybe as a country, but definitely with Russia and Ukraine. This was way before the war. And years later, you being able to build that technology using AI to identify. Years later, when the conflict with Ukraine and Russia happened, you saw the disinformation going on. I thought Victor was way ahead of his time in terms of identifying that would become a bigger and bigger issue and being ahead of the curve. And so, for our lab to get these perspectives of people who actually deal with these issues from their home countries and then come here to study and have a chance to participate in the lab, I think that's what makes the lab special, right? When I look around the university, you're one of the most pro-America, you love the values, you love everything, and you weren't born here. And so it's interesting that immigrants' view on the country, but why do you love the ideals of the United States?
What makes this country unique is that it's not about the differences, the founding principles that attracted immigrants from across the world. No other country embodied this blend of liberty and natural rights combined with religious freedoms. There is no other place that provides the platform and provides freedom to do that.
What do you think Arizona State University, the Luminosity Lab, and the United States all have in common?
Courageous people build the future, challenging that status quo in order to create a bigger, greater good for society, like founding fathers did, like Arizona State did, like the Luminosity Lab that was born out of the same philosophy. Open doors, diverse talent, different ideas. Come pitch, let's see where we can get if you want to generate better, greater social good.
You look at this university and it reflects the ideals of the country and Western democracy. And we've created a place where people from all walks of life can come and challenge each other's ideas and learn. And you look at Luminosity and all it is agency, right? And that's all people ever wanted. But giving an experience where students get to drive everything. So if your biggest fear is maybe not doing well on a project, and the root of that is because the project's very ambitious, it's a good problem to have in our society. And I think that's why, our call to action really is for people to go out and pursue the things that make them fearful. Victor, I got really lucky because it's my turn and it's the last question, and
no way.
They saved the best one for last,
I'm gonna have to
right?
improvise quickly. Okay.
Oh, okay. This is, if you were never gonna see me again, what would you want me to know? It's a hard one.
What a question. I'll probably need a few seconds.
Can I tell you mine?
Yes.
Because you wouldn't know this. It was yesterday, actually. I have my 18-month-old son. His name's Mark, and he was sitting in his chair. He was like chowing down on some cereal. And so it was funny because my wife was commenting on how fast he was eating that. I said, wait, it's like, where did we get the cereal? I've never seen the little boxes. She's like, you don't remember? Victor gave those as gifts to Mark a couple months ago. And I remembered, I said, you're right. I said, why did Victor give us like small boxes of cereal? And my wife said, it's because you told him that your son liked cereal. In a very small comment, you told him that. And he knew, and he went and he got your son cereal and he gave it to us as a gift. That happened to me yesterday, and I thought, what a beautiful thing about Victor, right? That's who you are as a person. Like these small things in life, you seize them, you capture them, you listen to people, you get to know people. And you made my son's day yesterday. You made our day too. It's like, Lauren and I spent some time talking about how special you are as a person. So if I never saw you again, I would say never stop doing that, right? Your love of people, your love of the small details, getting to know them and using that to drive further value in their life. That's what makes you who you are. That's why I think we gravitated towards one another, and I hope you carry that with you through all your days.
It gave me goosebumps. Thank you so much. This is very kind of you, Mark, and I love your family a lot. And to that point, answering that question, I talked with my parents a lot. I've told my father a lot about you, and I've never had an opportunity to tell you this, but you've been almost a role model in our internal conversations within the family, because whenever I tell them about the things I work at the lab or projects that I'm thinking about, my father quite often asks, what did Mark say? Did you meet Mark recently? And he just understands what kind of person you are, and that it's not just me, it's people that are lucky and fortunate enough to get into the zone of your influence, that you help advance their lives, their careers, understand their passions, and many of the things that we talked about today, that will stay friends with you forever. And I do want you to know and understand how much I appreciate that, and many other people that I've talked to. I just think it's very precious and kind of you to do that for students and anyone that approaches you.
Thank you, Victor. So nice talking with you.
Nice talking to you.
I look forward to meeting your dad.